to here. Feels like ages since we've been here. I was away. We were in Culburra for 1 week ministering at the church up there. Then I was down in Tasmania ministering at a church down there. Then we were back for a week, and then we all had the opportunity to watch Noah play rep AFL. Represented the Shoalhaven and played against the Illawarra and Sapphire Coast. And I think we need to do birth certificate checks on some of those kids. They were taller than me, and they had like better facial hair than what I can grow. So, you got little Noah, and I said, no, just remember the story of David and Goliath. You've got the AFL ball, just kick it at them. We had a great weekend, but it is so good. I think when you're spending time away, there's nothing like coming home, hey. I know when I've been away and coming home and sleeping in my own bed, there's nothing like that. And it's like same when I've been away from church. It's nothing like, it's great going away and seeing other places, but there's something unique about our house here. So I'm really expectant for this morning, and it just feels like we're in a pretty significant season, hey. And who can tell me what our theme for the year is? City on a Hill. Our theme for the year is out of Matthew 5, City on the Hill. And it's where Jesus really speaks. This is why you're here. You're here to be a city on a hill. You're here to be a light that represents me. And I love that because there's something powerful about light, hey. When there is light, it expels darkness. And I tell you what, I believe that we're in a season where Jesus once again is standing before his church. Not just our church, but the church. Say, come on, church. It's time to be that city on the hill. It's time to be that bright, burning, beaming light that goes beyond a service or an organisation, but actually sees darkness extinguished across communities and sees darkness expelled across the generations. And I don't know about you, but I want to be that church. I want to be that church that shines, that is that light, is that city on a hill. And over the last few weeks, we've been on a bit of a theme. And, as I was thinking about this whole idea of being a city, and I love this idea of the church being a city because a city expands across territories, doesn't it? A city is not limited to one location. It's not just a place, a street number. A city is a region. And I think with the church to be a city, the church is people, hey. The church is us. And so we're the church as a city where God has placed us in all different places, in all different spheres of life. But as we as a church shine our lights together, if I'm shining my light in the places that God has placed me, Lisa is shining her light in the places that God has got her, Liam shining his light in the places that God has got him. And together we're shining as a church. All of a sudden we're seeing a city being influenced. We're seeing our town and our community being transformed. And I was thinking about this idea of a city. And a city needs building. A city needs establishing. And we've been on this journey, and, I'd say it just feels like coincidence, but, God has orchestrated these last couple of weeks of messages where I feel like God has been taken on a journey back into Joshua. Where, the children of Israel, we see God through Moses led them out of Egypt. They were in slavery. And God had a promise. Hey, God had a promise for the children of Israel from the days of Abraham. It was this land of promise. It was this land of milk and honey. It was this land where generations upon generations would flourish. It was a promise to Abraham that your descendants would be as numerous as the stars, like the grains in the sand. You would not be able to count your descendants. And I'm giving you a land that your children, your children's children, and the generations to come would flourish in. And it was a promise that God spoke into the heart of Abraham that caused Abraham to go and leave where he was and position himself. Now, I love the promises of God, hey. And I think sometimes we need a reminder of some of the promises that God has for us. And then we read, it gets to Jacob, and there's a great famine, and then they relocate into Egypt for food reasons. But then rose up a Pharaoh, and they were all enslaved. And then we come to a point where God is looking on his children. He's seeing the pain. He's seeing the hopelessness that is on this generation. And God, in his heart, is like, no, this is not my purpose for my children of Israel. I have this land that flows with milk and honey, this land of promise, yet my children are in a place of bondage. So now it is time for me to begin leading my children out into the place that I have for them. And so we catch on to Moses, and Moses being God's man for that. And we read about this extraordinary journey where God, rains all sorts of things on Egypt. We read about the miraculous parting of the Red Sea when Moses holds up his rod and the Red Sea just parts. And how cool would that be to watch? Wouldn't that be amazing? And it would be loud. It would be hectic. And yet, God moves the natural elements of the world and displays, God the creator, God that spoke the universe into being, all parts this Red Sea. And then we read how, the pillar of fire and the presence of God would appear upon the mountain, and the miraculous provision of food. I feel like my kids need that for breakfast sometime, hey? The miraculous provision of food in the morning. But then we read that when it gets to the point where they're at the point of crossing, they're at the River Jordan there, and God's saying, okay, now it's time to go into the land. He sends out 12 spies. All right, we're here. All that stands in our way is this River Jordan. We're ready to cross, but you 12 spies, you go and tell us what you see. And then it comes back with negativity. Who loves the voice of negativity? Isn't it great, the voice of doubt, negativity? So they're full of faith, like God has led them to this point. We're here, the River Jordan, and they can see the promised land on the other side. Then the spies come back. Oh, indeed, there's milk and honey. But there are kids with moustaches in that land. There are kids, there are giants. We look like grasshoppers. That's how I feel to most people. I feel like a grasshopper to most people. They come back intimidated, discouraged. And they came back, and that confession and what they saw from the natural eye influenced an entire nation. We can't do this. And God was like, yeah, you can't, but I can. Remember me bringing you out of the land of Egypt. Remember the parting of the Red Sea. Remember the provision in the wilderness. How could you forget that? It's like sometimes like Jesus with his disciples, hey? The question is, Jesus, guys, didn't you see what I just did? And yet you're asking me these silly questions again. It gives me hope, because I feel like I'm like that with God at times. And so then what we see is God saying, well, that's it. You and this generation can stay here in the wilderness. You can stay here on this side of the Jordan, and for the next 40 odd years, look at the promised land, but you're not going to go and inherit it. I don't know about you, but I'd be so frustrated at that. Hey, seeing that what God has promised, knowing it was literally on the other side of this river, and not being able to cross over. Yet, there were two men that had faith, Joshua and Caleb. And Joshua and Caleb were like annoyed at the confession of the other 10 spies. They're like, no, come on, Israel, don't listen to them. We can do it because God is with us. God isn't with them. God is with us. Remember what God has done. God will do the same. Yet the children of Israel chose to listen to the doubt and the discouragement of the other 10 spies. And so we read that here they are on the one side of the Jordan River. Then Joshua 1, God speaks. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now you and this people rise up, cross over this Jordan into the land that I'm giving you. And I feel like for us as a church, I feel like even for us as an individual, that God is saying, come on, it's time to rise up. It's time to dust yourself off from a season that was, to dust yourself off from a season that felt like wilderness. That was a hard wilderness that we had to walk through. And now you and these people, come on. The promise is just there. The promise is there. Now you and these people rise up and cross over. And so we've had a few weeks of these messages that are coming out of Joshua. A couple of weeks ago, I preached from Joshua 1 about strength and courage, and how 3 times... as a parent, when you've got to say something 3 times to your kids, you want to get that message through, hey. My first time, it's kind of like just a suggestion. No, get your shoes on. Second time, I like looking around. I can hear kids, Noah. I'm like looking, Noah, get your shoes on. If I've got to say it 3 times, my tone completely changes. I want them to get this message. And so 3 times, God commands them, come on, strength and courage, go across. Strength and courage, move across. Strength and courage, come on, time to go. And then Kath last week, I heard Kath preach an amazing message on like Jericho and taking down giants and faith. And, you know, when we move into the promised land, there are battles to fight, hey. There are Jerichos, there are walls, there are giants to take down. And it does feel like a season of taking down giants. But before Jericho and before stepping their feet on the promised land, there was still something that stood in their way. And it was the Jordan River. There was a river that separated the children of God from the promises of God. And as I thought about that, I thought about that for us. You know, sometimes there are things that block the way from the promises of God. Hey, you know, I feel like Joshua 1, God speaks. Now, there's a promise. There is a promise that's been spoken for generations. There is a land for you just on the other side of this river. Get going. Take all of these children of Israel with you. Go and take it. And I'm probably a bit like Joshua. I'm like, let's go. Yeah, I kind of a bit like, you know, where Peter sees Jesus walking on the water. And then he's like, I love Peter because he speaks before he thinks. And I feel like I'm a bit like that as well. Peter's like, Jesus, if that is you, let me step out of the boat and walk on the water with you. And Jesus is like, all right, come on, Peter. And so Peter jumps out, he's walking on the water. And then the moment, his mind's catching up with what he said. I'm a bit like that. God says go, I'm like, let's go. And then halfway through, I'm like, what have I done? When God said, you know, move from Culburra down to Ulladulla in a caravan with 4 kids, I'm like, yes, Jesus, let's do it. A week into it, I'm like, what have I done? What have you done to me, Jesus? And then there's a reality, though. So God speaks promise, and I think we can hear that. We get excited about the promises that God speaks to us. But then when reality sinks in, it's like, but God, there is a body of water. There is this Jordan River. How on earth am I going to get from here to there and take hold of your promise? And Joshua 3 unpacks the story of the crossing of the Jordan River. And it is so significant. And I felt like for us, there's a word in season that God is calling even us as a church into greater promise. That there have been promises that have been spoken over this church for generations. For our own life, there have been promises that God has spoken over us, over our families, over our marriages, over our lives. And I feel like God's saying, okay, now's the time. Come on, cross over. Shake this wilderness season off you. You and these people go into the land that I'm giving to you. But there's a Jordan. So how do we cross over the Jordan? And so I was going to do it in one message. But then as I was reading, I'm thinking, do you know what? There is so much in Joshua 3 for us that let's take some time and let's really get into what God is saying in Joshua 3. You know the story. It's the story of God's love. I think sometimes we forget about the love and how God literally moved heaven and earth to bring them to that place of the Jordan. When God spoke to a generation, it was out of love. Come on, guys. My heart and my desire is not wilderness for you. Yes, it was a passage. Yes, there are seasons of wilderness that I lead you through, but it's never an end destination. The end destination is this place of promise. This end destination is a land of milk and honey. Yeah, there are battles in the promised land. And the heart of God was like, I'm going to move. I'm going to do the supernatural. I'm going to do the miraculous to bring you into a place of promise. But will you come? Will you follow me? And this is where Joshua picks up. And so, Joshua chapter 3, verse 1. Are we ready for it? Does everyone want to cross over the Jordan? 2 people. I want to cross over to the Jordan. I want to see revival. Who wants to see revival? You know, I want to see darkness broken. I want to cross over to the place where God has called us. So, Joshua 1, that's titled, Israel Crosses the Jordan. Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and they set out from Acacia Grove and came to the Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and lodged there before they crossed over. And so it was 3 days that the officers went through the camp. And they commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priest, the Levites, bearing it, then you shall set out from your place and go after it. And there shall be a space between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Do not come near it, that you may know the way which you must go. And Joshua said to the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. And I want to pause it there. And so here we read, go back to Joshua 1, now you and this people rise up over to the Jordan. So Joshua has gathered all the children of Israel and off they go. They're at the banks of the Jordan where they're about to cross. Now you may think, okay, this is good. They're going to cross over. It later goes on and says in Joshua that they were in flood season. So the river Jordan wasn't at its normal flow. So they weren't at the narrowest point where to cross over, where it could have been easier. God has told them, right, cross over now. It is peaking. It is flooding. It later goes on and says in Joshua that the riverbanks had actually broken, and so there were floodplains, and here God was saying, right, come on guys, let's cross over. So you could imagine the children of Israel, right? Joshua saying, right, God said go, and they're like, let's do it, Joshua. They get there and they're like, how are we going to do this? It is estimated that at a normal rate, like it's 90 feet deep and in some spots, the Jordan River. And so you can imagine not only the depth of it, but the currents. You know, when we had all that rain and we were watching all the floods and how powerful the river, they were standing there going, oh my goodness, Joshua, what have you got us in for? And they were probably looking, where's Moses' rod? You know, the one that he held up. We know that's in the Ark of the Covenant, so what are we going to do, Joshua? And so here, from verse 1 to 5, the first things that Joshua said to the children of Israel is, first of all, bring out the Ark of the Covenant. And when you see the Ark of the Covenant, come out of your tents, create space between you and the Ark of the Covenant, that you may see and be led into places that you haven't gone before. So why is this significant? The Ark of the Covenant represented the very presence of God. The Ark of the Covenant was the place that dwelt in the Holy of Holies, in the tabernacle that Moses had built. There were specifications to the priest. Only the priest could carry the presence of God. And it couldn't be transported on horse or cart. It had to be carried. And so this represented that the presence of God would lead you across the Jordan. No bridge. You don't have to build boats. You don't have to create your own ways. We want you to focus on the presence of God because it will lead you in places where you haven't been before. And as I thought about that, I thought, wow. Because when we rewind into Exodus, we read how Joshua and Moses, they built this place called the Tent of Meeting, which represented the presence of God. They would go and meet with the presence of God. And in that place, there's a moment where God is so frustrated at Israel. He's like, just go. I'm done with you all. Just go and I'll give you the land. But Moses' cry was, no, God. If your presence doesn't lead us, if your presence doesn't go before us like it has in the past, then we dare not go. We do not dare walk in the places that you haven't broken out before us. And so now as we fast forward here to Joshua 3, we're seeing a fulfillment of that promise. God's covenant with Moses is, okay, I will be with you wherever you go. What a promise, hey? What a promise for us today. That God's presence will be with us wherever we go. And here, so the first command to Joshua was bring out the presence of God. And as the presence of God goes before you, everyone gather in behind the presence of God. Don't be focused on the Jordan River. be focused on the Ark of the Covenant, because it's about to lead you into places where you've never been before. And when I thought about that for us, I thought, if we're to cross over, where is our focus? Is our focus on the overflowing Jordan River? Is our focus on the impossibilities of how to cross over, on the impossibilities of the mountains that stand before us? Here God was saying, okay, a generation focused on the wrong things, right? It focused on the impossibilities of the land, of the promise. But here God was saying to a new generation, I want your focus to be back on my presence, to be focused back on me leading you in, and watch what I will do. And as I thought, again for us, he's going to lead us into places where we've never stepped foot before. Now, I'm one of those people, I get excited at that. I love the unknown. I love the adventure. Chriselle, on the other hand, takes the time to get over the line. That's where we balance each other well. But I love the unknown. But I feel like for us, where's our focus? And I feel like we're in this season where God's actually calling our eyes back onto his presence, back onto him. Do we have that trust? Do we have that faith? Do we have the obedience to keep our eyes on him and go into the places that he's calling us? The next thing that Joshua says in verse 5, he goes on and says, and Joshua said to the people, sanctify yourself. Say that with me. Sanctify yourself. Turn to the person next to you and say, sanctify yourself. That's pretty rude. For tomorrow, the Lord will do wonders among you. First of all, when the presence of God comes out, when the ark comes out, come out from your places of dwelling and gather behind the presence of God, that your eyes will be focused. The next command was, before you cross over, before you watch the supernatural, sanctify yourself. For tomorrow, I will do wonders among you. And I know there have been seasons that God has brought me to this verse, like over a few times. And normally before a fast, I feel like fasting for me is this sanctification where I really suffer with the caffeine withdrawals and the sugar withdrawals of the headaches. But lately, as I've been back in this, the word sanctify has really been standing out. But before God was to move, before God was going to, use the supernatural to part this Jordan of the Red Sea, there was this command to the children of Israel. Okay, Israel, before I do wonders among you, I want you to sanctify yourself. I want you to separate, consecrate your hearts, your minds, your bodies afresh. Because where I'm leading you needs purity. Where I'm leading you, you need to be clean. Because my presence is going to do something that you've never seen before. And for that to happen, I need a clean and a pure heart people. As you look up the word, the Hebrew word for sanctify or consecrate is kodesh. And it means apartness, sacredness, dedicated, holiness, to make oneself clean. And we read again about it in Exodus 19, where God is saying, Moses, I want you to come up to Mount Sinai. I'm going to meet with you on this mountaintop. And Israel knew that when Moses went up into the presence of God, God spoke. And such was the intensity of the presence of God that Moses, your face is too bright. We know you've stepped beyond sunburn. It's not just the redness of sunburn. You need to put a veil over your face because we can't look upon you. But before Moses went up, the same command in Exodus was, children of Israel, sanctify yourself, for tomorrow I will meet with you. And so here is this command of sanctify. And the physical act of sanctification for the Israelites was they would take their clothes and they'd do the laundry. Basically, that's what it is, do the laundry. They would take their clothes and they would scrub them clean. And that represented this cleansing. It represented this purification that as you wear clean clothes, you know what it's like when you have dirty clothes. They smell or they're dirty. Like the other night I was doing chicken wings on the smoker and I decided to wear a white shirt as I scrubbed that smoker clean. I know. I got to serve. I did get a serve for that. And, I had to spray it because Chriselle goes, I'm not touching that. Because then I decided to do the whole clean on the smoker as well in my white shirt, as you do. So, for those with boys, you're thinking, is there hope as they get old? No, there's not. No, there's not. And, and there was this process. I had to spray it, then wash it. And then Chriselle brought it out to me yesterday and dropped it. She goes, you need to respray that and re-soak that one again. So I had to spray it again, give it a good scrub in hoping that I'd get all those charcoal stains out of my nice white shirt. I know. Feel sorry for me, please. Pray for me. Pray for me. I need help. I need Jesus. And so there's this process, right? So they would sanctify themselves. There was this act of purity. And as you read through the Bible, there are moments that when God reveals himself to people and to individuals in the fullness, in the glory, that there's this sudden awareness of humanity. Isaiah, when he's in the temple and God appears to him in the glory, what was Isaiah's response? Was, get away from me, for I am unclean. I cannot stand in your presence because of my humanity and because of my sin. And then we read the angels purified him, purified his lips, and then God commissioned him with a mission. And we read some of these grapples and some of these struggles with David, like in Psalm 23, in Psalm 24, and verse 3-4, it says, who may ascend to the hill of the Lord, or who may stand in his holy place? There's this wrestle within David, God, I want to stand in the place of your presence. David knew what it was. He valued the presence of God. God, I want to stand. Who can go to that place where Moses went? Who can go to that place where Joshua went? There's this wrestle with David. Who can do that? And in verse 4 he says, he who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not lifted up his soul to an idol, nor sworn deceitfully, he shall receive blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation. This is Jacob, the generation who seek him, who seek your face. And so even within David, there's like, God, I want to step into your presence. But for me to do so, I need my heart to be pure. My hands need to be clean. My tongue needs to be cleansed. And then in Psalm 139, he says, I'm going to go from verse 23 to 24. No, I'm not. Don't you love it when you write down the wrong verse? In Psalm, there's this wrestle with David. He goes, God, search my heart. Test my heart. Is it Psalm 139? Yeah? 23. I was reading the wrong psalm. I was like, no, Psalm, it only has 13. I was reading Psalm 140. That's why. All right. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxieties, and see if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me into the way everlasting. I feel like that's a bold declaration, hey? I don't know, I can't remember the last time I stood before the presence of God and said, hey God, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxieties. Has anyone prayed that bold prayer lately? I read that and I feel a bit anxious in praying that. I get a little bit of anxiety going, I don't know if I want to pray that, God. I don't know if I want you to search my heart. But you see, there was this desperation in David to know and be led by the presence of God. And for God to bring Israel into this place of promise, there had to be a fresh setting aside. There had to be this fresh, God, cleanse me. God, purify my heart. God, purify my thoughts. Purify my words. Because I want to be led by you. I want to see these, don't know how you're going to, they didn't know how the Jordan was going to part. They didn't know that. All they knew is they had to follow the presence of God. But for God to move the miraculous, there needed to be purity across Israel. And then when we hit Romans 3, and in verse 23, it says, "For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God." Paul reminds us that all of us have sinned. All of us need this consecration. All of us need this purification. You know, one of the things I've been really caught up on lately was the cross. And when Jesus died, there used to be like this big veil that separated the inner court from the outer court. And the inner court was where the presence of God dwelt. It was where the Ark of the Covenant would sit. And only the priest could go in. They had to do all these cleansing rituals to even go into the presence of God. But then when Jesus died, the veil was miraculously torn into, which was impossible. It was impossible for anyone to tear the veil because of the way it was sewn. And so the veil was torn in two, which meant then Jesus, because of the price of Jesus, that we actually had access into that place of the presence of God. But it also says that on that cross, he took on our sins. He took on all of our impurities, that we would be pure and that we'd be deemed holy to walk in that presence of God. And then Paul goes on to say, I feel like it's a bit doom and gloom, hey? All have sinned and all have fallen short of the glory of God. You think, great, thanks, Paul. Where's the hope in that? But then he goes on and says, being justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. So through Jesus, that there's this purification. Through Jesus, there's this cleansing that can take part in our lives and in our heart. But then as I thought about that, I thought, but it still requires us to come before Jesus. It still requires us to come before him and go, okay, God, I just want to come to a place of consecration. Jesus, dare I pray it, search my heart, know my thoughts. And if there is anything impure, if there's anything of sin, if there is anything that separates me from your presence, reveal it so then I may deal with it. Because God, I want to cross that Jordan. I want to move into the promise. Now, why did God say consecrate yourself at that point? Because God wanted to deal with the past. God wanted to deal with this is kind of that last act of the last season. It was that last step of the wilderness. Okay, before you go over, let's deal with some things. I don't want you to bring the baggage from Egypt. I don't want you to bring the baggage of Moses. I don't want you to bring the baggage of the wilderness over into the promise. Because this promise, it's the land of milk and honey. It's this place where you will flourish, a place where you will thrive. So let's deal with the heart now. Let's deal with the thoughts and your words now. So then as we cross over, one, you'll be led by my glory and my presence, but I will do something new. You'll walk in places where you have never walked before. And I felt like for us, that it sees in an environment where God's saying, okay, is your heart consecrated before me? Are your eyes on me in this season? Are you prepared to take dirty laundry and give it a good scrub? Because I want to clothe you in garments of victory. I want to clothe you in garments of freedom. The Bible says if Christ has set you free, you shall be what? You shall be what? Free indeed. And I feel like we're in a place in a moment where God is saying, okay, pray those words of David. Search my heart. Test my thoughts. If there is anything that's not from you, God, let's deal with it now. Because I want to be one that is led by you. I want to be one that follows after you with faith, with courage, strength, and be obedient to the things that you're calling to. If I can get the team up, I want to finish up now. I want to read the words of David once more. And we just might do that, set a fire inside my soul. Because what I feel for us to do this morning, it's something that we can't pray for you for. It's really a heart attitude between you and God. Hey, consecrate yourself. He didn't say to Joshua, you go out and consecrate all the people. Joshua, you stand and make sure they're all washing their clothes according to ritual. No, it says you consecrate yourself. You deal with your heart. You deal with your mind. You deal with your attitudes, your thoughts from last season. That they could have not done it. And we could have seen another generation perish in the wilderness, but they did it. And we'll go on next week and we read about the miraculous parting of the Red Sea, and it's an incredible story. But before we do, we got to deal with some things in the heart. We got to deal with some thoughts. We got to deal with some things from the last season. Psalm 139. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxieties, and see if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way of everlasting. Let's stand. I just want to create a moment now between us and God. I think sometimes we do church and we can rush off, but the kids are out, probably for another 5 minutes if we're lucky. Let's make the most of that, hey? Let's just create space between us and God. Let's actually come before the bank of that Jordan River and say, okay, God, I want to cross over. Who wants to cross over? I think all of us say, we want to cross over into this place of promise. But God, I don't want to do it in my own strength. Because that's crap. That sucks. We fail. I grow weary when I do it in David's strength. But God, I want to be led in the supernatural. I want to be led by your presence and your glory. I want a fresh revelation of your glory and your presence for my life. But God, in the words of David, search me, oh God, know my heart. So God, we honor you. And Jesus, we thank you for the redemption that you gave us. That from the moment of Adam, that there was separation because of sin. And the moment you came, and the moment you died, the moment you rose, there was freedom for humanity once again. That we have all sinned. We've all fallen short of God's glory. But Jesus, you have made it possible for us to walk hand in hand with God once again. To encounter the glory and to encounter your presence. We thank you, Jesus, that you offer forgiveness for all of our sins, for all of our attitudes, for all our shortcomings. And so, Jesus, right now, eyes are fresh. We come before you again. Jesus, we just don't want a nice move of God. But in the words of Moses, we want to see your face. We want to see your glory. We want to be led by your presence in this season. We know it's only your presence that can bring the breakthrough in our own lives that we are searching for. We know it's only your presence that can bring breakthrough into our marriages and into our families. We as a church know it's only your presence that can bring a breakthrough into our community and bring about a revival that will be talked about for generations to come. But we so acknowledge our need of you. And I pray now in this moment, as we consecrate ourselves afresh, that you would search our hearts, you would know our thoughts, that we may bring them before you afresh and consecrate ourselves before you this morning. Thank you, Lord.